Is the camera still straight? Because now it's like.
Where's the mic?
Okay, is that better? That's a lot of arm and mic. Is this good?
Yes, don't angle your face towards the mic. Just talk normally.
Oh wait, I almost ate it. It hit my chin. Okay, my little clock here.
What is that for?
It really serves no function, but it was in my office. Let me push the heater away from my face.
Oh my god. Are you gonna keep fucking with that thing?
What? Oh, it's not intentional, you know?
I
What am I
know it.
supposed to do? I talk with my arms.
Okay, are you prepared?
No. No. Okay, now it's too much animated. I have too much hair now in my face. Hold on. Okay, here. Wait, there's still a strand that's like harassing me. All right, are we starting?
I've been starting. Are you
Oh,
kidding? I'm not letting this go by.
you gotta let a bitch know.
Bitch, we're starting.
Okay.
All right, you ready? You gonna do your intro?
Okay. I always have to think about what this project is. It takes a minute. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Media Psyche. Back to another episode of B5. So, today we're going to be covering the episode called Eyes. Before I start, I guess I just want to point out something that I noticed about myself. Every time we watch this episode, Elaine and I,
Every time we watch it.
an episode of B5, and I have like obviously we're watching this because we're going to film it. I always have this sense of like feeling really overwhelmed. And I think to myself, what am I going to talk about? It's like this all the time. And by this point, we're in like what, 22 episodes in? Is this the 22nd episode?
No, the 22nd episode is the last episode.
Oh, okay. I'm a little ahead of myself. Okay, what is this?
Isn't this 16 or
Okay, that sounds about right. And if we're looking at CBT, we're looking at the cognitions, right? My thought is having this thought, I don't know what I'm going to talk about. I may not have anything to say. Then I have the feeling of being overwhelmed and anxious. And then the behavior is, well, the evidence that goes against it is like, well, I always accomplish it every time. It may not be perfect, but I'm able to talk about something that I noticed in the episode.
hmm
But it's an interesting thing how that becomes recurring. And so I guess I share that because I know that I'm not the only one who feels this way about things, where people do experience some things in life where they have a negative thought or they have this negative feeling, but there is evidence to support that you're able to get through it.
Why do you always have this feeling then, even after 10 plus years of trying to do this and like plenty of videos, to showcase well, let me just say, you don't watch your own videos. And I don't know that a lot of people who are fans of this know that. You don't watch them. You record them, but then you don't go on YouTube and watch them over. So you don't have a really clear view of the fact that, yes, you are doing it, you are good at it, you do know what to say, but I think you avoid watching yourself for different reasons. But I think that's going to contribute to you not realizing how very good you are at doing what you do.
The thing about it is, before you do any project, there's that prep that you need to take. And initially, when I first watched the episode, you're just being exposed to it, right? This new episode.
Mm.
And just gleaning from that isn't enough to say, okay, now I have things to talk about. And even though I know that I would put the effort in to figure out what it is that I want to talk about and sit with myself with like honesty and recognize the points that made me feel a certain way and note those as highlights, there's still this preparation that needs to be done. But on top of that, wondering if I'm able to contribute to something that would be meaningful and also on point. I think there is a little bit of anxiety or maybe even like a slight fear that whatever it is that I may convey may not be as accurate or may not be as on point, because I know I'm not perfect, but also in that there is the chance for continual self-exploration, right? And then like discussions that I can have with you to hone in on certain topics that really need a deeper level of analysis. But at the surface level, it's just this knowing that I have to do the preparations and then wondering to myself, am I going to be able to present something that's original or has meaning? Or am I going to be able to find something in the crevices of my mind that's important enough to talk about? I have to say, B5 is wonderful in this way where they give you a lot to talk about. So when I first watched the episode Eyes, I said to myself, oh my God, there's a lot in there, but I don't know what I want to talk about. And then I rewatched it like another time. I always watch it a second time. First one just to see what the episode is about and how it makes me feel, or how certain parts of it made me feel.
Hmm.
And then the second part is to really go in there and recognize why I felt the way I did.
Hmm.
So that's the process I take.
I want to just remark on something that you said. You said how it's the words that you use. Like you're worried about whether you will say something that's on point, or you worry that whether you'll be able to say something that is correct. Like as if there's a right way and a wrong way to express what media means to you, and there isn't. This project, as much as I had to explain this originally to the first bunch of fans, is not Psychologist Reacts to B5. It's not an analysis of Babylon 5 or what JMS was doing or what each episode is saying. This project is about how each episode speaks to you. And that's going to be very different for everybody. So you don't have to worry about whether something is correct or on point or meaningful. It's always going to be meaningful because it's coming from you and how you felt. But there's no correct, there's no perfect,
Hmm.
there's none of that. All you have to do is exactly what you said. You watch it, see how it makes you feel, what it brings up for you, and then you just explain it. It's for you. It's not really
Right.
for anyone else to really understand. And I think some people will watch your episodes and not really understand where you're coming from because they're not you.
Sure.
And
Sure.
that's okay because it's not really for them. It's more for people to see what this process of media therapy is like.
Right. And so, which is where I then said, even if there were things that came up for me, then it gives, and it may not be quite on point to like what I may accurately want to describe,
Mm.
because it's still like an exploration, right?
Hmm.
And this is where I said, it does lead to further exploration and deeper analysis. But yes, yes, I mean, it's all about the journey, and that's what I am recognizing and have come to conclude, which is why I can now sit in front of the camera and just say, hey, I'm going to talk about whatever I'm going to talk about and not feel as nervous as I first did when we first started the project, 10 years ago. And then when we restarted it 2 years ago, when we delved into it the first time with like consistency.
Hmm.
This actually is leading me to think about the thing that I said last episode, the last time we recorded, where we talked about how I didn't feel like I was ready to do media therapy because I just wasn't in that. I didn't know how to derive from it.
Hmm.
It's not so much that the process was, I guess the clarification I want to make in that is that like this process works if you can be honest with yourself and know how to pick out the things that you had a reaction to and talk about it. I don't think that at the time I was quite in that headspace to want to do that.
Mm.
That's the distinction I think I wanted to make, because I remembered saying something where I said I just couldn't do it, or what did I say exactly? It was to the effect that whatever it was, I wasn't trying to. What I want to clarify is that like this process is to help you open up your thinking and consider different perspectives, but it certainly requires you to be honest with the things that you're experiencing. And I think I just wasn't generally good with that either because I tend to have been a bit more guarded, or
You definitely watched media from behind a wall.
yeah, like I didn't really quite understand that. It was always in third person that I watched it, or just, right. And there's a level of vulnerability that you have to allow yourself to have when you're watching media from a place of it, like you say, if this episode is written for you, then what is it telling you, or what triggers you, or what transferential reactions are you having, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's one clarification I really wanted to make based on what I said last time. I don't think I just was in that headspace for it. And it's very much the same process as therapy, right? If you're not in the space to do the work and do that, explore yourself and analyze yourself, then you're not ready for therapy. You're going to
Right.
stay guarded. Just because you show up doesn't mean that you're going to get better.
Right.
Eyes. All right, there were a few things in this episode that resonated with me, and I wanted to try to be very honest with this. And it does leave me to be a bit more vulnerable of with myself and share much more of like what my own thought processes are and what I feel. There's an there's a part in the episode where Ivanova says to Mr. Gray, "I'm grateful that Psykhe has given you a purpose in life. When that purpose includes scanning my mind to prove my loyalty, it's not only invasion of my privacy, but my honor." It's not only invasion of my privacy, but my honor. That line stood out to me for a significant reason. When you grew up in a household that's really chaotic and the boundaries of your privacy are blurred, you don't really know what your right is and what your right is not. You don't really understand the concept of privacy. You don't really understand the concept of what's healthy boundary. And you don't really understand what it means to have self respect because someone else throughout your lifetime, starting with your primary caregivers, your parents, cross those lines and they don't teach you what that's supposed to mean. And you carry that throughout your whole life, thinking that it's okay for other people to step beyond those lines into your privacy, into your bubble. And I think for the longest time, that was a very big struggle for me, knowing what those lines were. So I guess in many ways, often people would think that they could go beyond a certain point with me and still have it be okay. But I also didn't define those lines too. It took a very long time to understand where my boundaries were and to really sit with myself to figure out what felt good and what didn't feel good. And I could tell you, sometimes even now, there are times where I feel people cross the line with me, but it's now comes to wondering whether or not do I have to have understanding for those people, or, I still question where those lines are. It's more solid than it was before, but I don't think that it's really easy to define, especially when you've had a lifetime of people crossing those lines and crossing that level of privacy that you're supposed to have, and it's been so intrusive. I think that is an ongoing question most people have for themselves too, especially if they've had that kind of experience, which is why establishing healthy boundaries is actually very hard for many people. Someone recently said to me, she asked me a question. She says, where's the line between where empathy is for the person that you're in this relationship with, and when it's not okay for yourself? The conclusion she was able to come to after this guided exploration was that it was disrupting her peace. It was disrupting who she felt she was in her own skin, her identity, and what felt unsafe. That's a little bit of a more clear-cut line, but it is definitely a place to start. You could certainly have empathy for someone, but you could certainly do both, right? Have empathy for someone, but also still set clear boundaries for yourself. Anyway, that is one of those areas where I continue to also hone in my own idea of where those lines are for people, and where my kindness doesn't blur into people then feeling like they can take advantage of that, and being able to set those clear lines with some of the people that I encounter in my life. And I think what this person recently asked me, where that line is, where it's okay. That's an important question to ask yourself. Where do you think it is okay? And be really honest with, how it makes you feel, because I think your gut often tells you what's right. And then Ivanova talks about honor, right? That it's not only invasion of my privacy, but my honor. I really had to think hard about that word honor. And honor is one of those words that really speaks to your own ethical principles, your own guiding force, and who you believe your character is, and what your character is. And that's another one of those things that you don't really establish until you, one, have an experience that really defines you, or two, you end up questioning yourself and wondering who you are as a person, what your standards and values are, and being steadfast in upholding that. So, honor. I'm reminded of another conversation with someone. And I realized something about myself in that moment where this person spoke ill of someone else. And then I recognized that I had to speak up to this person and really set my own boundaries with this person and let them know where I stood on a certain topic. And I recognized that what was strong in me was the sense of loyalty to the people that are important to me, but also making sure to let them know that where they were thinking and how they were thinking about something was not okay, even at the cost of the possible friendship being at risk, because that was more important to be able to speak my mind and let them know that what they were saying and thinking was not okay to the circumstance. I reflected back on the person I was many years ago and how I really didn't have a backbone as to where I stood, and that it took a very long time to be able to establish at least this part of myself where I can say with certainty that this is who I am. That took time. It took time, and it took a lot of self-exploration and being honest with myself to be able to get to that place. And I think that that's one way where you establish what your honor is. And when someone comes to threaten who you are, then that's something that you really do need to stand up for.
Do you think that you valued more, well, maybe even from a cultural standpoint, was it more for you about saving face than it was standing up for other people? Were you thinking more about what was going to be the result of you speaking up for someone else versus speaking up for someone else? Like, what were you going to lose by speaking up? Was that the losing face with the people that were saying the things that you probably didn't agree with? Was that more important to you in the past? Whereas now you're just like, fuck those people kind of thing? Because when I met you, you were very rigid in certain things and then very not rigid in other things. And I always thought that you always had it a little backwards, but I also attributed that a little bit to your upbringing as well.
My upbringing, as you know, is not just based on Korean culture, but also growing up as a child of an alcoholic parent and living through domestic violence, right?
But
So,
they also have very rigid values
oh, but
in
it's a
that regard.
combination of all those three. And does that really, like, take a toll on you? It wasn't just Korean cultural values. It was a combination of all those different factors that made up for the psychological turmoil. At the same time, this strange resilience to push forward, but although it may have been in the wrong ways, you know, like it kept me strong enough to not give up in life, or not fall into this severe depression or anxiety to the point where I was not functional. It's a strange combination of things. Like I said, it was really hard to tell where those lines were. I fought against the things that I needed to fight against even as a child. I was absolutely rebellious. And what's the other word? I was rebellious, and I argued a lot. I fought against them.
Hmm.
And I always said what I said. But underneath that was the part of me that never really had love and acceptance or validation because I
Mm.
grew up in such a chaotic household. So the complicated thing about that is, as much as I fought against my parents and what I felt was wrong, when it came to wanting acceptance from other people, I was much more lenient in letting those boundaries blur.
Mm.
But I also didn't know where those lines were at the time. That's the challenge because it was never taught. Or it was never taught, but there was always this constant intrusion of my own privacy.
So you could understand where your parents were crossing the line, but when it came to everyone outside of that, it was blurry.
It was because with my parents, there was still at least, I mean, I wasn't getting what I needed to get from them, which was a love and support and validation in the way that would be healthy.
Hmm.
But outside of that, there was this constant need to want to be accepted and validated. And there was a sense of the self-fulfilling prophecy because I didn't feel wanted. When you live in a household with an alcoholic parent, you always wonder whether or not you're lovable.
Mm.
Because the equation is, well, if you were lovable enough and if you were important enough, then would you be living through this hell with your parent who was never wanting to be part of reality or part of your life? And instead, there was nothing but violence, right?
Mm.
So you end up wondering whether or not you yourself is lovable, important enough, and you're seeking validation and support from other sources, other places. But I never really had that growing up either because I kept myself very isolated. And then years pass by, and then, you fall into these relationships or friendships or whatever relationships they were, seeking validation, which is not the right way to have relationships either.
Mm.
So when Ivanova talked about this, it resonated with me because she was so steadfast in what she believed in, and she was so strong. And that was just such a beautiful moment as she's fighting for her own honor, something that she truly believes is so important for herself. For a long time, I didn't know what that was. And now it's like, well, all right, you have something to say. You want to say something that really goes against what I want, what I believe in. All right, let's go.
You always
It's
liked
like,
you always liked Ivanova, definitely from the very beginning. Even when we first started this project, she was someone who you really gravitated towards.
I did. I did. And more, I see elements of myself in her. But she's just, but she has it more figured out in that area than I had before in my life.
Mm.
I can say I'm much more solid in who I am now than I was before, but it took time, like I said, to get to this place. Um, yeah. Okay. The other moment that resonated with me, and I had this reaction too, was when the colonel, what's his name? Ben Zaline?
Oh, uh-huh.
I don't think that's his name, but that,
Scarface. Yeah.
huh?
Scarface.
Yeah, that dude. When he was threatening Sinclair and telling him what he needed to do, and then he then appoints himself as a captain of the ship and how he was going to take over and get him, even like threatened to even get him executed.
Mm.
And he also says the line to him where, thanks to the Minbari, you got it. At that moment, the reaction that I had was, oh my God, I hope the Minbari like steps foot and tries to, save him.
Mm. Okay.
It's an
Save
interesting,
Sinclair, you mean?
right.
You wanted them to step in and say something?
Yeah, like there was a moment in that where like I had this reaction. I want the Minbari to step in and save him because Sinclair is going through this really difficult challenge with this guy, and I wanted him to be saved by
That would have
someone
made it
else.
worse if they had stepped. It would have confirmed what that guy was accusing, them of, or that relationship of being. That definitely would have made it worse.
Right. The transferential reaction that I had to this was how, for a very long time in my life, I really felt like I had no internal locus of control.
Hmm.
Growing up in my childhood, my teenage years, my college years, I always felt like I had no internal locus of control and that my fate and destiny was tied into like having only external locus of control. And the difference between that is the internal locus of control. Someone who has more internal locus of control is just someone who feels like they can influence their own life and outcome. Whereas someone who has an external locus of control feels like other sources are accountable for their fate and their outcome.
Ah. Mm-hmm.
And when you grow up in an environment where, again, your privacy is not respected, you're not taught to have self respect, your opinions are not valued, your feelings are neglected, and you live in this environment where you are constantly in this state of helplessness because you can't control the dynamics, right? You can't control what's going on inside the household because you can't control your parents' alcoholism. You can't control all that domestic violence and aggression and fighting. You can't control all that. And I learned that there was a lot of helplessness and hopelessness in the way I was, basically my life, that someone else was responsible for you.
Hmm.
So as I was watching Sinclair and this colonel's interaction unfold, I felt really helpless in that moment for Sinclair, but that's obviously this reaction that I was having, feeling as though like what is he going to do to help? What is he going to do in this situation?
Hmm.
Especially when that threat was so aggressively being targeted towards him. So it reminded me of the fact that, like, for the longest time in my life, I felt like I had no agency over my own life. And so I lived my life very passively, hoping for someone to come and save me.
Hmm.
And in this case, the thought for Sinclair was, oh my God, is Minbari going to be coming over? But like Delen's on vacation somewhere. And
And
Lanier's so busy with his
Lanier's busy building a
motorcycle.
motorcycle. He's not. He doesn't care what's going on.
He was so absorbed in this, right? Like we can't rely on him right now. But yeah,
That's
that was the thought that
interesting,
came
though,
to me.
that triggered you, even though at this point in your life you do have more control, but you still. I would definitely call that very triggering because your first instinct was who is going to save him.
Right. There's still a part of me, right? The little child in me that feels like, I need to be saved by someone or something.
Hmm.
There's still a part of me that sort of passively sits by and wonders if some sort of divine intervention is going to happen or I'm going to be struck with some sort of luck.
Right.
Again, that's the external locus of control to help shape or change the course of my future. Logically, I know that's not true. Logically, also, I know that it's you who has to continuously shape your own destiny in order to meet the kind of fate that you want to meet.
Hmm.
Because you have to work towards all these opportunities that you that could open up for you, but that only takes place with preparation. I could sit here and say, "Hey, I'm going to sit in my house," and just one day have someone like knock on my door and say, "Hey, do you need a savior today?" And I don't want the Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I don't That's not where I kind of want to go because I've had that experience.
Your own personal haji?
Yes.
You always gravitate towards those type of characters in anime. Always. Like those are just your favorite favorites. I can tell if I've seen it and you've seen it. I'm like, I know who Jenny's gonna like.
There's this definitely this fantastical part of me where I dream of or fantasize, right? Fantasize of someone coming to save me as I sit, staring at my four walls in my home. But we know that's not reality. More so nowadays, maybe it's like a small percentage of like hoping that could happen. But a huge percentage of that is knowing that I have to create my own opportunities, and I worked hard towards those things. Once I recognize, I mean, but it's not even that. I mean, since college, I worked hard towards just a path that I felt like I needed to go towards. And not because I knew what my career path was, but because it just gave me a sense of direction, and I just followed it, and almost blindly.
Mm.
Because without it, I didn't know what else I would be doing other than standing on some sort of imaginary balcony and waiting for, Prince Charming to like show up, or maybe some spirit to come and tell me that I was the one who was appointed to like lead the way. And then I would go on this like mystical journey, like Lord of the Rings. I mean, I don't know if I want that struggle, but
Something a little less struggly.
but hey, I don't know. There would have been a part of me where I would have taken anything at the time because it would have been better than like the silence or the
Mm.
silent struggling that I was doing. So yeah, I thought of that. And so I reflected on how I changed, but I followed my path blindly until it became a part of my identity. Um, but it certainly was recognizing the fact that things won't happen to you and fate won't happen to you in the way that you want it to happen or maybe dream of happening unless you actually are prepared for the opportunities to come meet you when they actually do. You can't wish to sing but not know how to sing, and then someone comes over and says, "Hey, you want to join our band?" "Yeah, sure, but I can't sing." That doesn't happen that way. So
So how did you feel when Sinclair kind of saved himself?
I admire Sinclair.
I know.
I really like Sinclair. And I know you tell me that the next person that takes over him is even better, so I'm really looking forward to that. But I really
I
do
don't
like
I
his
don't I want
character.
to clarify that. I'm not sure
Okay.
that he's better,
Okay.
but I think Sinclair and Sheridan are very similar, and I think that was probably done on purpose. Like their temperaments are similar as far as what
Okay.
they believe in and what they'll fight for. I think that Sheridan is a little tougher. I think that he's more willing to maybe piss more people off. I think he also makes more mistakes, but I think their temperament is very similar. I think that you will like him just as much as far as his way of seeing things and being open and being receptive to truth.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I look forward to that. I do gravitate to Sinclair and admire him because he has this willingness to allow himself to be curious,
Mm.
but also when things become tough for him, he tackles on all these problems. And that's another interesting thing about him. Life is always going to be challenging. It's never this smooth ride. You're always going to be faced with some sort of adversity. It's a given. And there are those people who say, "Why me? Why is this happening to me?" Initially, I did when I was first diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, or even before that, when I really became sick and didn't even know what it was. Eventually, that led to then ulcerative colitis because I didn't have the full symptoms of the disease until like 10 years later because it kept becoming it because it was neglected during that whole time because no one knew what was wrong with me. You start off with the why me? Why am I being punished? And why is my life the way it is? And why is my life so hard? And you become envious of the people that don't have those same struggles. I recently had a conversation with someone who said the same thing. Why is my life not like other people's? Why is it like so hard for me all the time? But it really is a matter of perspective, right? Again, we can go back to the internal versus external locus of control. Sinclair takes on these challenges and he tries to solve those problems. Even with Ivanova, he reassures her that she's not going to get the brain scanning done. And he's so sure of himself. Like he's so sure of himself that he's not going to let that happen. And that level of confidence is something to admire
Mm.
and also strive towards, even though he knows he's not perfect. But he knows he's going to do his best. And I think all life challenges need to be tackled in that way, instead of thinking, why me? I mean, I guess you can feel bad for yourself for a moment. You still need to grieve the challenges that you do have and you do face. I'm not saying you have to be emotionless in those times. Those things do affect us in negative ways. But it's about finding strength and being able to move forward because we can't get too stuck there. So, those are the things that came up for me when it came to Sinclair and the Colonel. That for your life to become what you want it to become, you have to keep working towards the way you want your life to be. I saw an Instagram reel where this person is an introvert, and she says, an introvert waiting for my partner to show up, and she's at home eating, binge watching Netflix, and then someone just rings on the door and says, "Hey, are you looking for a soulmate? I am here." And how that never, of course, that's never going to happen. That doesn't happen that way. Okay.
What did you think of the Colonel? Did you have any kind of visceral reaction to his character and the things he did and said? He's very triggering for a lot of people.
He is. The Colonel. With anything you do, I think you always have to look at the intent behind what their actions are. And in this situation, the Colonel was certainly motivated by his own motives. His own motives of being envious of the fact that Sinclair was chosen to be the captain of B5 and he felt he needed to because he was more decorated or had more credentials. He did more and he felt he was entitled to that. What is there to say?
Well, I mean, from from my standpoint, I mean, I've seen that episode plenty of times, but I still find myself triggered by what I consider to be such, extreme emotional dysregulation. Like, so whenever I encounter anybody like this guy, someone who is filled, like almost shaking with rage, right? Everything that comes out of his mouth is angry. Like, and nothing that he's doing is seems normal. Like everything that he's doing, every action he takes, it has anger behind it. Everything he says, everything that comes out of his mouth, and I find people like that incredibly dangerous, and I find them very triggering for me for, similar reasons. You and I are not so dissimilar in how we grew up. So I tend to immediately, back away from people who are acting suspiciously unhinged or not suspiciously unhinged, and that there's clearly something wrong with them. Like the
Hmm.
fact that he sweats so much, for example, and is just, he seems like he's on the verge of exploding in every single shot. And the actor, tends to play characters like that a lot, actually. He's very good at it, but that makes me really nervous in any person that I encounter. And their motivations always are abundantly clear. I think people who have heightened sense of danger, because they grew up in traumatic or abusive situations, we tend to immediately be able to recognize people who are dangerous and people who are out to hurt you for their own reasons, right? So even, I mean, even me watching it, I tend to back off. I like a lot of things go up for me when he's on the screen and he's talking, and it it didn't take me a whole episode to figure out what his motivations were, right? By the time he finally admits what it is, right, where he's coming from, I think, you know, people like us, we already know what his problem is. It's very obvious as soon as he steps on the screen and starts talking what he's angry about. He just hasn't admitted it. He just hasn't said it out loud. So I guess, like, I'm wondering what your reaction to someone like that is, or do you just find him obvious and you tend to sort of gloss over that type of thing? You are more triggered by Sinclair being a victim of it versus the colonel himself sort of triggering you. I'm more triggered by the colonel, than Sinclair being victimized. Like, I can see it happening, but I'm not worried about Sinclair, whereas the colonel really gets to me more than, you know. So I'm just curious, like, how is that for you?
When I encountered, so yeah, so my initial reaction was feeling the threat and worrying for Sinclair
Mm.
because I didn't want him to suffer any kind of consequences from someone who was, as you said, unhinged. And I mean, the guy was ready to shoot him,
Right.
right? I think that resonated more with me because probably because I want to be able to handle those situations, which I've learned to, but I want to be able to handle those situations, continue to, handle those situations the way Sinclair has,
Mm.
with this level of self-assuredness and confidence, and still being able to maintain your,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
what's the word, your composure.
Yep.
And that resonated more with me because I think that people like the Colonel are abundant.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as he is triggering in the moment, people like that are certainly triggering for me. And I do my part in trying to avoid it. or if I had no choice, stand up to it, which I have. It's a really terrible feeling knowing that someone is going to come after you in such a way that's so hostile and they try to bring you down. And I think because I'm going to continue to encounter such people, I focus on how I'm going to handle those situations and learn to handle those situations and
Mm,
prepare to handle those situations more so than feeling as triggered by it, I guess.
mm. Got it.
When I say, what is there to say? There are many people who are like that,
Sure.
who are envious, who are jealous, who feel that they're entitled to are, what they believe they're entitled to. The problem with some of the people is that they're not people you can actually have a rational conversation with.
Right.
You can't argue. You can't have an intelligent argument with such people because they're already tunnel visioned and they already feel that life has been so unfair to them. You can't ask them to have like introspection and self insight and say, hey, by the way, why don't you look at your own limitations here and your own flaws and look at the fact that you can have your own internal locus of control and stop blaming someone else for taking something from you. I mean, I can't imagine having this conversation with this colonel.
Right. And honestly, the entire episode sort of would not have turned out the way it was if there wasn't a third party in that room.
Right. And that third party was the Psykhe,
Hmm.
was Mr. Gray, when he recognized the kind of person he really was.
Hmm. Without him, there would have been no solution. Even by admitting it. Like if he had admitted to Sinclair what his problem was, but there was no one in the room, no third party to hear that and to, read his emotions, right? Then it wouldn't have ended the same way.
I guess in some ways, then Mr. Gray was Sinclair's savior in that moment. I'm
Right,
just recognizing.
the Psychor of all people. Yeah.
Yeah. But he became the witness.
Hmm.
And you certainly need someone like that to help validate the experience. So, it's not just you against someone else who other people may not believe.
Hmm.
I continue to believe in karma. I think that's how I get through some things. We need something to hold on to during tough times. Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Here's another moment where that like struck me and I had a reaction to. It was when Garibaldi says to Lanier, I said you could work on it, but not finish it, when he talks about the motorcycle.
Hmm.
And he's a little upset because he says, I wanted to build it myself. It was a purpose in my life. There was a point in my life where this would have really upset me. That if I was in Garibaldi's shoes, I would have been very angry at Lanier for finishing the motorcycle and building it himself. And the reason for that is, for the longest time, I always felt that I had to do everything myself. And even now I still do. A
Mm.
part of me still believes that I have to do everything myself, and asking for help is a sign of weakness. Or not even like so much weakness, it just feels like I didn't prove it to myself that I could do it.
Mm.
And there's still a part of me that holds on to that, even though there's no way you can live this life without help. You can't know everything. You're constantly influenced by everything around you that inspires you and motivates you. You can't say that you don't that you can't have the help or you shouldn't have the help around you in order to make your life better. Because in fact, that keeps you in one place. So I thought if I was Garibaldi in that moment, and if I was my very old self, I would have been very angry at Lanier, to the point of maybe even raging at him for not understanding the fact that I would have wanted to have accomplished this myself. And he could have been the bystander to help, answer my questions. And this would have just been like under my terms, right?
Mm.
I thought about how rigid I used to be and what that means. And it is a function of trauma,
Mm.
of feeling like you have to continue to prove to yourself that you can survive all these challenges and adversities in your life without the help of anyone else. Because if you got help from someone else, then that means that you're not surviving it yourself. You're not proving yourself to yourself or to other people that may see you. And there's a certain level of pride that comes with not being able to prove that. And you do wear those achievements as a badge of honor when you do come out of it from through the other, to the other side. The problem is that you'll get there a little slower, or you'll get there understanding the wrong things, or you'll still get there, but you're still alone. I really thought that Garibaldi's response was so wonderful because as much as he felt angry at Lanier in that split second that he completed the project, his life purpose on his own, that he wasn't stuck there. And he
Mm.
immediately moved on to, hey, let's go for a ride now because now it's done and it can be operable. Now we can move forward on a different trajectory, on a different path, on a different adventure. Let's go ride this motorcycle together.
Mm-hmm.
How wonderful is that he can just move from that one split second negative emotion to then moving forward into a future of being able to share this moment and then sharing with Lanier what it's like to ride a motorcycle.
Mm-hmm.
And if like his statement to Lanier wasn't a joke, the statement like, I get out of here. And Lanier did actually walk off sulking, upset at himself that he didn't understand Garibaldi. They wouldn't have had that moment, this positive moment of like riding this motorcycle on the B5 ship. It looked like it was 100 miles an hour, but I'm sure it was about 5. I just thought it was a wonderful moment.
Mm.
What it looks like not to feel stuck in your negative thought, in your negative emotion. And you just have to keep forward. You just have to keep moving forward. And what a great metaphor that they move forward on a motorcycle that goes fast. So I love that moment. I think it's going to stay with me for a little while. It certainly, definitely aligns with how I live my life now, where I know I want help so then I could move forward a little bit faster in the direction that I want to take, rather than trying to figure everything out for myself because I don't have all that wisdom.
And you don't get as stuck in anger.
Yeah. You don't want to stay in negative emotion for too long because then it consumes you. And if it consumes you, the longer you allow it to consume you, the more time you waste. And the regret that comes at the end of that becomes unbearable. I know that story too. And speaking of, being stuck, right? And maybe this is also part of Ivanova's sense of honor and her standard and value. But Ivanova has that dream about her mother, and her mother gets, well, ends up getting this shot.
Hmm.
And she repeats to herself, only one way out. And she chose a way that immobilizes her.
Versus,
What was their alternative? Working with Psykhe, right?
yeah, the Psychor takes you from, and trains you and, does all that stuff, and you work for the Psychor.
I don't really know what would have been worse because I don't really know what the Psykhe involves. But I think, but she chose a shot and it left her like no longer connected, right?
Yeah, it's essentially like, I don't want to say lobotomizes you, but it
Yeah.
basically strips you of who you are. And again, it depends on the different perspectives of the Psychor. Like, um, Mr. Gray had his perspective of what the Psychor meant to him. Talia also said something similar. Like, the people that end up there usually are orphans, or they're people that don't have family. So of course they're grateful. That's their family. That becomes their purpose. But we haven't really heard from people who have a negative opinion of their time in the Psychor. We haven't really met up with people who are like, this is garbage. This is, even Ironheart, he was in the process of evolving into this like super psychic entity, but he wasn't negatively speaking about the Psychor except to say that they're getting more powerful and people need to pay attention to it, but he wasn't saying that the core was bad or anything like that. We haven't met Psychor members who believe differently,
Mm-hmm.
right? I would say Mr. Gray is the closest to a person we've met who questions, at least,
Mm-hmm.
maybe, and is capable of understanding different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Talia still didn't quite understand Ivanova, and that relationship is something that we'll see evolve in a different way. But at the beginning, she was like, I don't quite get why you're so angry. The core is great. Whereas Mr. Gray was kind of like, I understand where you're coming from, you know? So he's the first glimpse we have that not everybody is kind of blind-sided to the core being everything that's great and good and wonderful and necessary. So the
Yeah.
other options, it depends on your perspective, but ultimately it means you get taken from your family and how they train you and what they do to help you develop those powers. We still don't really know the full extent of that, but no one's ever said anything bad about it, but it
Right.
probably isn't good.
Okay. Well, I guess it leaves me with questions then because Ivanova has this dream and where the mother says, only one way out. And then she takes the place of her mother physically in this dream and she says, only one way out. And the next day she wants to resign,
Hmm.
and which would which would mean that she faces the consequences of no longer having the career that she does and the status that she does. Only one way out. It's a very difficult thought to feel that there's only one solution to something. And I know that in many situations there's only one solution. There can be only one solution. Sometimes I think it's a matter of perspective and how you handle that one solution, or questioning whether or not there's only just that one solution. I think it's a personal question for people to ask themselves. So I guess I thought to myself, like, only one way out. I think about it in terms of people who I work with, And sometimes they think that there's only one way out to certain problems, and it's often not the case. So being able to allow yourself to have alternative views and consider alternative solutions is something, but it's so hard when you feel so tunnel visioned. It's not an easy thing to be able to allow yourself to do. For me personally, I thought about this and I had a reaction to it because growing up with this sense of like learned helplessness, feeling as though having only external locus of control was my only one way out. But it did nothing. It hardly got me anywhere when I used to think that way. So it's one of those things that I think someone needs to ask for themselves, ask to themselves. Is there really just only one way out?
Well, for certain situations, you have the choice between only life and death, right? There's no
Yeah, there
other
is no in
option, right?
between.
And if you choose life, what kind of life is that going to be versus choosing death? Some
Mm-hmm.
people want to live under whatever those circumstances are,
Mm-hmm.
right? Even if it means they're, paralyzed forever or whatever, right? And in the case of the Psykhe, we're led to believe, or at least Ivanova's mother believes, that joining the Corps and being taken away from her family is akin to some sort of death, as opposed to, over the course of her life, having her power stripped from her and her mind taken from her. And she feels that as long as she's able to be with her family and try to maintain herself for as long as she can with the drug treatments, that that's better than going to the
So,
Psykhe.
right, so she actually stayed with her family, right?
Right, and I think every week or something they come and they give her injections because you can't have unmonitored, unregistered telepaths. It's illegal. So ultimately, they have to strip her of her ability to read minds by essentially taking her mind away from her, but it takes a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a very deeply personal question.
Hmm.
Only one way out.
Or if she didn't believe in what the Psychore was. Like, to me, well, and to other people, and I've seen this debate before, a lot of people have talked about this, that her mother could have joined the Corps.
Mm-hmm.
And the Corps doesn't necessarily strip you away from your family,
Mm-hmm.
but you would be working for them and doing, the Corps is mother, the Corps is father kind of thing, right? And, but it changes you, certainly. Would she be completely changed and somehow no longer love her family? I don't think so. It's a military career. Mr. Gray certainly wasn't lacking in sympathy, even though he comes across a little shady at first. But I believe his beliefs and his feelings were genuine, and
Yeah.
that, he owes the Corps his life, and it gave him a sense of purpose. But he's not a monster or something like Bester, who uses his skills to, hold power over people, right? So Ivanova's mother could have become a member of the Psychor, but still maintained her humanity. She still could have maintained her understanding of what was right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But her beliefs, perhaps, about what the Psychor represents were stronger, right? That she believes that the Psychor is not a positive force, that she believes that they're dangerous, that she doesn't like what they stand for, and therefore it is a death to have joined them.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it comes down to your personal beliefs, and I think that that's where a lot of the debate comes in. Why did she choose that and make her children suffer watching her slowly, you know, lose her mind, or just join the Psychor and still be alive in some way? But that was her belief,
Yeah,
like
I mean, it could
we've
also
been
have been
working.
her own sense of honor
Hmm.
to be able to stand up for what she did not believe in. Mr. Gray says a very powerful line. He says, "A part of a dream is better than none."
Mm-hmm. Do you believe that?
The way it resonated personally for me was, you know how I often talk about I lost 10 years of my life really being sick.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, struggling through just every single day, having the willpower to get up, having the willpower to go to work, brute forcing just surviving and getting through the day while feeling so incredibly ill. Um, Although it wasn't really in my control that I lost 10 years of my life, now I'm at this place where my symptoms are manageable, but I have to reconcile with the 10 years that I've lost. And the dreams that I had when I was in my 30s is not how it transpired.
Mm.
So at this point in my life, I can say to myself, having a part of a dream is better than none. Is a perspective where I feel that my life didn't turn out the way I thought it would have, that I would have been able to have a career sooner than later, a career as a psychologist sooner than later, or certain kinds of other opportunities sooner than later. I can't go back in time and redo my 30s. But what I do have is able to at least reconfigure what my dreams are now at this point and adjust to it.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I understood his statement. I think to go through life and feeling as though a huge chunk of what you wanted to establish is gone, and then feeling hopeless about that, is a pretty terrible place to be. And that you do need dreams in your life to be able to move forward or want to move forward, a sense of purpose, meaning. And it may not exactly look the way you thought of in your head. And in my case, when I was in my 30s, it just will be different. And I could still work towards having this part of my dream fulfilled. And that's just going to have to be good enough. And as I come closer to whatever those things may be, I may feel more fulfilled. I think as humans, we have to continue to adjust and adapt to the changes that we face because so many things are unexpected and so many things are out of your control. You can't control the economy, the weather. You can't control people who are in relationships with you. You can't control illness. So you have to continue to learn to adapt. And even modify your dreams. And that can change too. As time passes, as more experiences you have, the way you want to see your dreams or shape your dreams can change. And that's okay. That's okay. As you were talking about the Psykhe, first of all, the Psykhe emblem?
Yeah.
It's the same symbol used for psychology.
Mm-hmm.
because, it's a Greek letter for psi, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's an interesting thing because when people talk about the Psycorp, generally people don't like them.
You're right.
I'll tell you, the number of times where new people I've met, and they ask me what I do for my job, and I say I'm a psychologist. You know what the first thing they ask me is?
Not to dig around in their heads or, or analyze everything they say.
Their first question to me, and without fail, like 50% of the people that I meet, and not clients, not patients or anything like that, just
Mm.
people I meet, especially if it's a male that may be interested in me, because that seems to be the pattern.
Uh-huh.
Their first question to me is, are you analyzing me right now?
Yes. Yes, I am.
My response to that is, are you that insecure that you're afraid of me analyzing you? Like, what is it that you're hiding? Or like, why are you even asking me this question?
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing about that is, do you know how many people are really good at analyzing people? I mean, like,
Exactly.
businessmen are like better therapists. They're better, like, at analysis of people than like some therapists are.
Exactly.
We just happen to know, factors that could contribute to like why you are the way you are. Like, we could do a little bit of profiling, right?
It doesn't take a psychologist to know
But
that
it
his
doesn't
question is a
take a
red flag.
psychologist to know this.
Right.
Are we the only ones who do the analyzing? Because, last I checked, everyone has some sort of gut instinct that actually allows people to know who they're dealing with,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
So I often get that, and that triggers me actually. That's the first question to me. Well, do you think that that's what defines me? My career, my title as a psychologist, my title as a psychologist defines me?
I'd be able to know you were sus even if I wasn't a psychologist with a
Right.
question like that. That's a huge red flag. I don't care what your profession is. Anybody with any sense would know that that's a problem.
Yeah. Are you analyzing me right now? Well, are you a murderer? Like what? you know?
Yes, I'm analyzing you right now. You're an asshole. It doesn't surprise me though. But yes, as JMS, I think he put it, he said that, everybody thinks psychologists are poking around in other people's heads, right? And that's kind of how people describe the psycho every time. I don't want you poking around in my head. Stay out of my thoughts, right? And they're always like, look, I am only picking up your surface thoughts. Your surface thoughts are impossible to ignore. And whether you're psychic or not, that's the case in any person. Your surface thoughts and your surface emotions are easy to pick up because you're outwardly portraying them. It doesn't take a genius, right, to
No, it
pick up a surface
doesn't.
emotion. But I like that that's something that comes up for both, and that's why it's psi, right? It's you're poking around in my head, you're poking around in my business, you're seeing things I don't want you to see.
But you know what the thing is about that whole thing? Is that as much as they're of expressing some level of fear with whether or not I'm analyzing them, is that as much as people would like to think that they're unique, we're not.
Nope.
We're all bound by the same human condition. We are all bound by the same emotions that we feel. It's just that our experiences may be a little different, and how that takes shape to like the way we feel may be a little bit different. But we all run the whole gamut of all those emotions and those thoughts. If it wasn't the case, we couldn't just generate the list of all these negative and positive thoughts that people typically have.
Mm.
In EMDR, we have a negative cognitions list and a positive cognitions list. And when you look through and ask them to pick out the negative cognitions that they feel off the list, they pick the same ones that like resonate with them.
Hmm.
It's not unique. And I think that's one way to be able to bring down that barrier a little bit when you're looking for, or, like when you're feeling as though stuck in some emotions. How do I clarify this? Like, so often people are embarrassed to share their story or to talk about the things that happened. I understand the level of embarrassment, shame, and guilt that's involved in that. But to help bring down that barrier just a little bit, I think it's I think is to keep in mind that everyone has experienced this in some capacity
Mm.
because we're all tied in that way. That's what makes us human.
Hmm.
Okay. Well,
Still think you wouldn't be able to come up with anything to say 2 hours later?
look, I'm flying by the seat of my pants.
But that's where we get the best stuff where you just start talking. That's it. And it's
Yeah, it's
there.
that's another interesting thing about me, right? Because I never really had this. I mean, I grew up extremely being extremely painfully shy, and even throughout my grad school, I couldn't even participate in class without turning red and hyperventilating. So it's a very different place. You don't forget those parts of you, even though you may have moved on from it. It still kind of stays a little, you know?
Hmm. Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, I know. I know that there could be things that I could talk about, so I find reassurance in that. So it's okay. But it's still a little hard to sit in front of a camera and think, wow, you're going to end up talking for an hour. And I find it absolutely fascinating that, you know, you guys are watching
Yep.
and able to like listen to me speak for an hour. So, thank you. Every time I do sit here and talk about B5, I do hope that what I bring is something of value and it resonates in some way. So, thank you again for watching, and I'll be back again for next time. Episode 17, right?
Yes, it's a good one.
Okay. Looking forward to it. Bye, guys. I'm I'm glad that you thought that today's recording was good too.
I always think they're good. I have never thought that they were bad except that one time. That one time at band camp, the one time that like you were so lost and like we were down there for like 3 hours and you just,
Oh yeah, and then I got really angry.
yes, and you got really angry and we couldn't really continue and you just really got locked up at that point. But that's the only time. That's the only time I've ever felt that
Yeah,
way.
I think like when I watch this media, as long as I keep myself very open
Hmm.
in how I take the media in and see what resonated. Like it surprised me too, like at first, like the whole Sinclair thing and the colonel and like thinking, "Oh my God, I want the Minbari to come in and save him," right?
Hmm.
It surprised me as well for me to have felt that, but that I initially didn't know. I initially almost didn't even recognize that thought.
Oh, okay.
And it came to me where I'm like, wait, this is a moment I'm having.
Tell me you haven't been paying attention to what media therapy is without telling me